Cabaret in the death camps, with the SS looking on. Jewish inmates performing for their lives. The play Ghetto, produced some years back, is not fiction, but a faithful mirror of reality in the Holocaust years.
Schreiben Sie bitte.
Put this up in big letters. A graveyard is no place for play acting.
Friedhof spielt man kein Theater.
That's ridiculous. It's just primitive sentimentality and a distortion of the facts. The Third Reich, Hitler's regime, fascism, was the ultimate in arbitrary despotism. Everything was allowed. So we need to revise our ideas from the bottom up. What actually happened there may seem surreal, but remember, all an artist, a cabaret performer wants is to perform, nothing else.
Sure, singing saved my life. Not just once, countless times.
It was the only way I could survive 6 years of internment in a concentration camp. We had no choice. That graveyard was our stage. To be or not to be, that was the question. It was as simple as that.
Summer 1990, a woman in search of her past. 45 years on, Liesl Hofer, who miraculously escaped the inferno of Auschwitz, returns to the former ghetto in Theresienstadt, where she once fought for her life, with cabaret routines, jokes, humor, comic songs. The memories of hunger, cold and death are shot through with melodies from long ago.
Theresienstadt ist das modernste Ghetto, das die Welt heute hat.
January 1933. The Nazis are in power. In their reawakened Germany, there is precious little to laugh about. Germany is reawakening. You must obey. You must submit. You must yield to this prodigious force. Refusal to yield meant persecution, ostracism, arrest, incarceration, and torture. A few weeks after Hitler's rise to power, the first concentration camps were going up, like this one in Bergamo.
Man jagte uns aus den Betten zu nachtschlafender Zeit.
They turfed us out of our beds in the dead of night, and they had these pickets with rusty nails in them, and they beat us with them. It was the night of the long pickets. The aim was to demoralize us, to humiliate us, to make us abject, subhuman.
Die Nacht der langen Latten. Ziel dieser Nacht war, uns den Glauben an uns selbst zu nehmen, uns zu demütigen und zu Untermenschen zu machen. Was kann man jetzt tun?
What could we do? Then we hit on the idea of a circus performance. The circus director was a young communist from Oberhausen, and we rigged him out in an old green police uniform and sewed the buttons back on. And he introduced the circus.
Jungkommunist, dem wurde eine Livree verpasst, eine grüne Schuppeuniform, da wurden die bunten Knöpfe, die abgeschnitten waren, wieder dran genäht, ne? Und der eröffnete den Zirkus.
Circus Concentrani was the name the camp inmates gave to their cabaret program in Bergamo. The camp song, composed there in August 1933, went all round the world.
Wir sind die Moorsoldaten und zielen mit dem Spaten ins Moor. Wir sind die Moorsoldaten.
bei der dritten Strophe, da sangen wir den Refrain schon mit und die letzte Strophe, als dann der Refrain...
When the third verse came, we all sang the refrain. And in the last verse, when the refrain is repeated and it says, "Then the Moor soldiers won't be going out there with their spades," the chorus members marched on and rammed their spades into the earth. And all those handles next to one another looked like so many crosses.
Dieser Spatengriff hatte jetzt praktisch die Form von Kreuzen.
Under the Nazi regime, cabaret artists lived dangerously. Their material was censored. There were informers in the audience. Werner Fink's outspoken witticisms were as near the limit as he dared make them. "Yesterday we were closed," he joked in the Catacomba in Berlin. "Today we're open. If we're too open tomorrow, we'll be closed again the next day." One of the big hits of the Catacomba was a song about life on the ocean wave. The end came in May 1935. Ex-cabaret performer Isa Vermeeren remembers.
Da ich sehr späten Auftritt hatte, kam ich so wie üblich.
My number came late in the show, so I turned up at the usual time, at the Catacomba, 10, 10:30, but it was all dark. There was no one there. It was closed. Just a forlorn-looking waiter and all the chairs up on the tables. Naturally, I was scared. I went down to the restaurant on the ground floor. We were on good terms with the people there. The lady who ran the place was a delightful person. She took me to one side and said, "For God's sake, get away from Berlin as fast as you can. They've closed the Catacomba. They've rounded up Werner from the studio and Platte from the theater, and I don't know who else." So right that night, I went to the station, got on the next train to Hamburg, and traveled through the night. Next morning, I was in Hamburg at my father's place. But nobody inquired about me. I must have been too harmless for them to bother.
Bei meinem Vater in Hamburg. Und bin dann nach ein paar Tagen, es hat auch niemand nach mir gefragt. Also ich war denen doch zu harmlos aufgestanden.
Werner, you just mentioned, was Werner Fink, who was later to become a symbol for satire as a form of resistance, if such a thing exists.
Etwas wie ein Symbol des kabarettistischen Widerstands geworden ist, wenn es sowas gibt.
Ja, mit Recht, würde ich sagen, denn...
Quite rightly, I'd say. He played his role as a political conferencier with such awareness, such discipline, always pushing it to the limits.
Immer wieder mit dem Versuch, also so weit zu gehen, wie es irgend möglich ist, auch auf die Gefahr hin, dass es knallt. Zieh ruhig! Durch seine...
Always sticking his neck out with his brilliant routines and his matchless repartee.
Und bei mir hat's jetzt geknallt! War das ein Knall?
To intimidate the satirists, Goebbels had Werner Fink and his friends interned in the Esterwegen concentration camp for several weeks. Gone were the days of the famous cabarets in Berlin with their satirical sideswipes at life in the Roaring Twenties. Blacklisted by the Nazis on political or racial grounds, thousands of performers fled the country, among them all the big names in cabaret. Many of them had warned of the disaster to come, in vain. Staying behind meant towing the party line, or risking deportation, satire in the service of the new power holders.
Mal wieder über die Musik zu sprechen. Ich freue mich eigentlich, dass es heute alles so wunderbar im...
Talking of music, I'm very glad to see that people these days are so good at staying in tune. Though you still get the odd case of dissonance from time to time. And one or two people fond of drumming up trouble. But they soon get their comeuppance. We pack them off to a concert camp and make them practice getting the notes right until they've got used to playing in unison just like anyone else.
Ausbildung in ein Konzertlager, wo man ihnen dann so lange die Flötentöne beibringt, bis sie sich an eine taktvolle Mitarbeit gewöhnt haben.
In Oranienburg and other camps, the inmates were humiliated and tortured. Deportees to Dachau were welcomed with a cynical motto on the camp gates. Actor Erwin Geschonek was a political prisoner in Dachau.
Arbeit macht frei. Der Zynismus.
Work makes you free. The cynicism of that motto. What kind of freedom was it? The freedom to oppress and demoralize the inmates. We saw through it. And those who were strong enough stood up to them.
Wir haben das durchschaut. Und wer noch die Kraft hatte, der hat sich gewehrt.
Among those who stood up for themselves were various well-known cabaret artists. Humor was the only weapon they had. Hardly any of them survived the camps. The list of the victims is long. Paul Morgan, co-founder of Berlin's Cabaret der Komiker, died in Buchenwald in 1938. Esther Phillips, a mainstay of the camp cabaret in Westerbork, killed in Auschwitz in 1944. The satirist Jura Seufer, a Viennese review author, died 1939 in Buchenwald. Franz Engel, Viennese comedian and conferencier, 1944 in Auschwitz. Dora Gesson, from the ensemble of the Catacombe in Berlin, 1943 in Auschwitz. Max Ehrlich, well-known film comedian and conferencier, 1944 in Auschwitz. Alice Dorel, director of a German exiles cabaret in Holland, 1942 in Auschwitz. Kurt Geron, popular film star and cabaret artist, 1944 in Auschwitz. Willy Rosen, review artist and songwriter, 1944 in Auschwitz. Otto Wallburg, film comedian and cabaret artist, 1944 in Auschwitz. Fritz Grünbaum, review star of the Berlin cabaret scene, 1941 in Dachau. In the face of death, he joked, people who can't afford soap shouldn't run expensive concentration camps.
Herr Grünbaum, wir sind am gleichen Block gelegen und auf Stube 4 hat so etwas Kabarettartiges angefangen.
I was in the same block as Grünbaum, and he started up a cabaret kind of thing in dormitory 4. Every dormitory had 2, 3 or 4 big tables, and they put them together to form a kind of stage, and the performers doing the routines would get up on the table and crack their jokes or do their sketches. Actually, I hardly ever heard him properly because I had to cover him from the back in case there were guards in the offing. It was all strictly prohibited, of course. It wasn't until 1940, 1941 that we finally managed to get theatrical performances officially authorized. We had to wait until the war had started. And then we convinced the SS. I mean, convinced in inverted commas. You couldn't convince them. We got the political prisoners to persuade them. They said, we've got to have theatre. We need it to keep all these people from giving up altogether. It's not just entertainment. It gives them the courage to go on living. They need something to cheer them up. Laughter is the best medicine. It keeps them alive.
Irgendwie also durch Beredung, und zwar also vor allem die politischen Häftlinge, haben gesagt, also wir müssen deswegen Theater spielen, weil wir das brauchen, nicht wahr, um sonst viele Menschen doch also zu animieren, so zum Weiterleben. Nicht wahr? Denn Unterhaltung ist Unterhaltung auch des Lebens, also nicht nur Unterhaltung im Sinn, also dass du lachen kannst. Nicht wahr? Und Lachen ist ja eine Medizin, ein lebensunterhaltendes Element.
In the summer of 1943, Dachau was the scene of a grisly drama. Erwin Geschonek staged the grim goings-on and also took the leading role.
Hark what I have to tell. I bore it alone, a slave to my fate, and kept silence until I could hold my peace no more. Now hear my tale, and judge me as it befits a knight at arms.
Sei es drum, so hört mich an und richtet mich darob nach ritterlicher Art.
The lurid fable of Baron Schreckenstein was more than just an effective bit of blood and thunder.
The Schreckenstein play was a dramatic ballad, and if anyone had taken a look at the script or attended the rehearsals, we could never have put it on stage. It was written by an Austrian journalist, a friend of mine, one scene every day. The model for it was a popular tradition called Pradler peasant theatre, which still exists today. It's a kind of rural grand guignol full of knights of old beheading their victims on stage, and the audience keeps shouting, "One more!" and then someone else gets their head cut off and it rolls around the stage. For us, it was an obvious reference to the SS. The decapitations were a symbol of their extermination drive. They were our model.
Also das in übertragener Bedeutung. Das war unser Vorbild.
Eröffnung des Freilichttheaters Dachau am 13. Juni 1943. Uraufführung Die Blutnacht auf dem Schreckenstein oder Ritter Adolas Mordfahrt und ihr grausiges Ende. Für die wahre Liebe ist es nicht ein Ritterstück in 3 Aufzügen mit Musik.
Opening night at the open-air theatre in Dachau, 13th of June 1943. First performance of Gore Galore at Schreckenstein Castle, Baron Adolar's Bride and Her Grisly End, or True Love Ne'er Ran Smooth, a medieval ballad in 3 acts. The narrator was an actor from the Burgtheater in Vienna, and I staged it and played the leading role, Adolar, Baron Schreckenstein, a sort of parody of a feudal overlord living in his castle and making short work of anyone who got in his way. He was a simple-minded, power-crazed figure who would go to any lengths to keep others away from his lady-love. And in the end he kills her off as well, and later she comes back to haunt him. The idea behind the whole thing was to keep the inmates' spirits up. But at the same time it was an allusion to fascism, National Socialism. That was what we saw in it. But of course it would have been fatal if the SS got that impression. So when they laughed at what they saw on stage, it was a different kind of laughter from ours. They didn't really know what to make of it. But the inmates cottoned on straight away, especially the way I played my part, rolling my eyes and slaughtering everything in sight. And that was the message right at the end of the play, when I came to the front of the stage and asked the audience, "Tell me, what am I to do with all these people? Shall I club them to death, stab them, or let them live?" And the response was, "No, no, death to them, let them die." And I said, "Very well, if that is your verdict, I will slay them all." And they shouted, "Yes, death to them, that is their just reward." And then Adolar went and skewered them all, leaving a trail of mangled corpses behind.
Tritt vor das Publikum, an die Rampe. Sagen Sie, was soll ich denn nun mit diesen Leuten machen? Soll ich sie erschlagen oder soll ich sie erstechen oder soll ich sie am Leben lassen? Nein, nein, tot, tot. Sie müssen sterben, Sie müssen sterben. Und ich sagte, gut, wenn Sie der Ansicht sind, dann werde ich Sie erdolchen. Jawohl, nur tot. Das ist euer Lohn. Und er ging hin und stach sie alle nieder und trat nun rücksichtslos sein Mordwerk an.
Some people might say the camp inmates were well off. But the Nazis did it because they could only win the war if the arms industry was going flat out. And we were all involved in the armament drive. So they said to themselves, if it keeps them happy, playing music and performing sketches, why not? It doesn't cost us a penny.
Warum nicht? Das kostet uns ja nichts, nicht?
Ja, es gab in Dachau verschiedene Sachen, die ich mit...
In Dachau, I did a lot of things with Willi Horst, for example, who was also one of the actors in the Schreckenstein play. We did little sketches, blackouts we called them. Humor is a very important thing. Without humor, we would have been completely finished. You had to keep up appearances, so you had nothing to be ashamed of later when you got back out. And we all believed we'd get back out.
Dass man, wenn man rauskommt, wir haben ja alle geglaubt daran, dass wir rauskommen, dass man bestehen konnte.
Würden Sie sagen, dass...
Would you say that political humor and cabaret were things that stiffened people's will to resist at a time like that?
Auch den Widerstandswillen stärken konnte?
Ja, unbedingt.
Oh yes, definitely. They laughed when they started getting the message, and they did get the message.
Das verstanden haben und wir haben es verstanden.
Outside the camps, German cabaret was being turned into a mouthpiece for the regime. Propaganda Minister Goebbels, seen here visiting the Kabarett der Komiker in Berlin, explained that good humor was important for the war effort. And the war effort was going like a bomb. When the Germans invaded Holland in 1940, they took Hitler's crazed idea of the Jews as vermin with them. Wherever rats turn up, they bring destruction with them. They infect human resources and the food we eat, spreading illness and disease wherever they go. Plague, leprosy, typhoid, cholera, dysentery, and so on. They are cunning, cowardly, and cruel, and usually live in huge colonies. In the animal world, they stand for insidious, surreptitious devastation. Their counterpart in human society are the Jews. In the past, most of our theaters were run by Jews.
Nicht anders als die Juden unter den Menschen. Auf den meisten Bühnen regierten Juden.
Here, the Jewish comedians Ehrlich and Morgan. and the film comedian Geron. For a Jew, the portrayal of anything scabrous or unappetizing is an especially rich source of what they regard as comedy.
Als besonders ergiebiges Gebiet für komische Wirkungen.
Shortly afterwards, the anti-Semitic extermination drive began with a vengeance, in Amsterdam and elsewhere. Among its victims were German émigrés who had fled to Holland after 1933, including many Berlin stage artists popular in the 20s. They were put in a camp on the German-Dutch border. Westerbork, today a tranquil, idyllic place, it was once the starting point for the trains taking their weekly consignment of deportees to the death camps every Tuesday.
Westerbork war ein Durchgangslager der SS. 1942 mit dem Anfang der Razzias in Amsterdam und anderen großen Städten.
Westerbork was an SS transit camp. When the big crackdown started in 1942 in Amsterdam and other cities, it became the transit camp for all Jews from Holland being deported to the east. I was a draftsman, an advertising man, and I worked in the statistics office. They had everything in Westerbork. It was a proper village and it had everything a normal community would have, including cabaret.
Umgebung auch passiert, also auch Kabarett.
Ich sing mein Westerbork Serenade.
The camp reviews got up by the German professionals made Westerbork Europe's unsung capital of cabaret. The shows were put on whenever the trains left for Auschwitz or Sobibor. The star of the ensemble was Berlin's former darling of the small stage, Willi Rosen. Psychological mystery, writes one inmate in his diary. We're up to our necks in misery, but the show must go on. Graveside operettas. We crack jokes as they poise for the kill. The SS records the event on film.
Wie geht's Ihnen, Herr Fröhlich? Wie geht's Ihnen, Herr Schön?
Na, ich danke, so allmählich.
Na, auch mir kann's besser gehen.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Fröhlich.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Schön.
Wie geht's Ihnen, Herr Fröhlich?
Wie geht's Ihnen, Herr Schön?
Ich fühle mich gar nicht wohl heute.
Sie sind auch blass im Gesicht. Was haben Sie für Beschwerden?
Das weiß ich selber nicht. Wie geht's Ihnen, Herr Fröhlich?
Wie geht's Ihnen, Herr Schön?
The Westerbork Camp Theatre staged 6 large-scale reviews. The artistic director was Max Ehrlich, once a fated cabaret compere in Berlin.
Ich zum Beispiel, ich fahre furchtbar gern mit Frachtdampfern. Nur eins ist mir nicht sehr sympathisch. Da geht's mir auf der See so wie an der Börse. Ich kann die großen Schwankungen nicht vertragen.
Max Ehrlich would go on stage all alone and play a whole family. It was side-splitting.
Eine ganze Familie, über die man nur herzlich lachen konnte. Und
Max Ehrlich hat immer die Art gehabt, bevor der Vorhang aufging, er ging vor den Vorhang und sagte immer, wir gehen zum Zahnarzt oder wir gehen jetzt in ein Restaurant oder so. Und dann hat
Max Ehrlich had this special routine. He would go out in front of the curtain and say, now we're going to the dentist's or out to eat or whatever. Then he raised the curtain and said, just look at that. There was this one scene with a book bag. Max Ehrlich comes on in short pants. He's a real dunce. He says, sorry, sir, the acoustics are so bad in here. I can't understand you. And the teacher says, what do you mean acoustics? Can't you try that one on me? And Max says, I'm sorry, the acoustics are really poor. I can't hear you. The teacher goes slowly to the back of the room and says, well, you take my place out front and I'll answer you. Acoustics indeed. Go out front and ask me something. So Max Ehrlich goes out front, grinning, and says, "Please, sir, who was that standing in the entry last night with my sister, smooching? Not kissing. Smooching." The class bursts out laughing, and the teacher is all flustered and says, "You're quite right, the acoustics are terrible. I can't hear you at all."
Und der Lehrer wird ganz unsicher und sagt, ja, aber wirklich, hier ist keine Akustik. Effektiv keine Akustik. Und die Leute, die haben gelacht.
And how they laughed and applauded. It was like we were suddenly in a review in Berlin or somewhere, as if we'd been spirited away somewhere else. You can't imagine. Those people in the audience, they forgot where they were for 2 whole hours. The show took 2 hours. And I know it's hard to credit it, but that's how it was.
2 Stunden gedauert. Und das ist eben etwas, was man eben an sich gar nicht glauben kann. Nicht? Aber so war es.
Man hat gelachen, man hat geweint.
There was laughter, there were tears, just like in any other cabaret. Of course, I sometimes just sat there and thought, tomorrow I'll be seeing such and such off on that train. But if the cabaret was good, you just forgot your worries.
So wie jedes Kabarett heute. Dann vergisst man seine Sorgen.
Und natürlich sind da tausende Leute gesehen.
Of course, there were thousands of people arriving there on Monday and hearing tonight, Monday night, is cabaret night, and tomorrow morning that train pulls out. That's how it was. It's a mystery. But once you were there, in Westerbork, you did everything you could to stay put.
Das ist das ist ein Rätsel, aber wenn man drin ist, man hat alles versucht, länger in Westerbork zu bleiben.
More than 100,000 Jews left Westerbork, never to come back. SS Obersturmführer Gemmeker, the police officer from Düsseldorf, was no sadist. He smiled at his Jews as they left for Auschwitz.
Unser Kommandant, der war ein Liebhaber.
Our commandant was an aficionado of cabaret, music and all that. Those performances took place on his orders. It was good cabaret. And we got what we asked for, a microphone and lots else besides, because the commandant said so. And because he wanted some fun himself.
Mikrofonanlage, das kam eben, weil der Herr Kommandant das wollte. Und auch mitlachen wollte.
Das, was auch komisch war, der Gemmeke, der SS-Führer, der hat mit dem Julfest, am Julfest, das ist am 19. Dezember,
The really odd thing was that Gemmeker, the SS man, chose the Yuletide feast, that's the 19th of December, a Germanic Christmas festival, to invite the Nazi big shots from The Hague and all the really nasty Nazi criminals to Westerbork to come and see the review. That's hard to credit. And we all stood there dressed up as orderlies with our hair cut all nice and neat. And then they showed us how, when the high-up Nazis arrived, we should open the car door and help their wives to get out and escort them to the theatre. That was our job. I took part in the first review myself. It was in the recreation hall with a proper stage and stage settings, everything. My brother-in-law did the decorations with Hans Margulas. He lives in Munich now. And it was so fantastic. They thought nothing of sending people off to Amsterdam to get the clothes we needed. We got everything we wanted, just to make sure that it would be an A1 performance. And it was. We had a huge orchestra, a full-size symphony orchestra. In cultural terms, it was very, very good indeed.
Eine Tischlerei war da, es war alles da. Und die Dekor, mein Schwager war Dekor mit Hans Margulas, der wohnt jetzt in München. Die haben die Dekor gemacht. Und wie? Ganz fantastisch. So schön. Also es war alles da. Wir haben einfach ein paar Leute nach Amsterdam geschickt, um sich die Kleidung zu holen, zu mieten. Alles, was wir brauchen, würde geholt. Damit das wie sagt man das, ein A1-Performance war. Das war es auch. Wir hatten auch ein riesen Orchester da. Ein Symphonieorchester war da. Es war alles da. Also was das anbelangt, war das kulturmäßig gesehen sehr hoch kann man sagen.
Ik zing mijn Westerbork serenade. Tussen de barakken kreeg ik haar te pakken op de hei. Diese Westerbork
Es hat jedenfalls mitgeholfen, den Leuten...
And it helped people to soldier on. Why worry, they said to themselves. All you have to do in future is work, nothing else. Otherwise they wouldn't bother with all this. That certainly played a role. I don't know if it was intentional, but taking all things together, you can say that it was all part of the general plan. And it was a terrible thing, an atrocious thing to do to people. That's the only word for it.
So muss man das sagen, ja.
Es war natürlich, man hatte Absicht damit, aber die genauen Absichten eines...
Of course there was method to it. But inquiring into the exact intentions of an SS commandant 45 or 50 years on isn't easy. I think he probably didn't realize it himself. If you ask me, he thought that everything should just carry on as normally as possible. Except on those terrible Tuesdays when another train set off for the east with 1,000, 2,000, sometimes 3,000 Jews on it. And the next evening there was a cabaret show. I did a drawing of the recreation hall looking from the stage. You could see the chairs and the big armchair for the commandant. Non-Jews were not allowed to applaud because he frequently had guests from the headquarters in The Hague and other Nazi big shots. The whole thing was surreal, it really was.
Vom Kabarettsaal, von der Bühne aus gesehen. Da sehen Sie die Stühle und einen großen Sessel für den Herrn Kommandanten. Es war wohl verboten zu klatschen für Nichtjuden, denn er hatte oft Besuch von der SD-Hauptstelle in Den Haag und andere große Bonzen. Es war in Wirklichkeit unwirklich, was passierte.
Johnny und Joe singen Deni Rosen Potpourri.
The cabaret duo Johnny and Jones, singing a Willi Rosen ditty, songs written in the camps.
Alles heute Nacht den Sternen erzählt. Wieder bum, wieder bum, wieder bum, wieder bum. Sing unsere Gitarre, wieder bum, wieder bum. Man kann mit den Tönen Frauen verwöhnen, wieder bum. Die Meyers, Müllers, Levis und Co. Wir rufen Bravo, Johnny und Jones.
In the daytime, Johnny and Jones salvaged usable parts from crashed airplanes. Sent to Amsterdam in the summer of 1944 to find material for a stage curtain, they recorded their Westerbork songs in a friend's studio. Johnny and Jones did not live to see the end of the war. Both were killed in Bergen-Belsen, not yet 30.
Mir ist heut so nach Sonnenschein, mein Herz ruft laut Hurra. Rück mich fester, rauf mir meine Ruhe. Das Orchester spielt so süß dazu. Mir ist heut so nach Heidi Heidi Ho, du 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 du. Mir ist heut so nach glücklich sein und nach dem Rendezvous.
That's by Willi Rosen. There's another one of his I can still play a bit of. It goes, I told the flowers by day I love you. I told the stars by night I love you. I'm telling the world, for me there's only one girl, and it's you, yes it's you, only you. That was Willi Rosen too. And then there was, perhaps it was right to be crazy, thoughts often avoid the light of day. Sometimes I think you don't know who you are.
Das bist du, nur du. Das war Willi Rosen auch, ja. Und er hat noch gemacht. Vielleicht war dann das tolle erstrebenswert. Die Gedanken scheuen das Tageslicht. Ach, ich glaube oft, kennt euch selber nicht.
Wir haben großes Kabarett gemacht. Auf einer Bühne, die der
It was cabaret in the grand style. On a stage the camp commandant had built by Jews with a huge auditorium. He made them build that as well. And in the first two rows were the guests and the camp personnel, and behind them everyone else interned in the camp. For the first performances, at least. But then came, Westerbork was a transit camp for Auschwitz and Theresienstadt. Then the inmates from Bergen-Belsen arrived.
Westerbork war ja ein Durchgangslager nach Auschwitz und nach Theresienstadt. Und da kamen die aus Bergen-Belsen. Da kamen die aus Bergen-Belsen, es war also ein Durchgangslager, und wenn die Züge voll waren, kam der nächste Transport. Und die kamen fast alle aus Bergen-Belsen. Und da hatte man denen die Kleider weggenommen.
Then the people from Bergen-Belsen arrived. As I say, it was a transit camp, and as soon as the train was full, it pulled out, and that was it. They'd taken their clothes away from them, and they were dressed in rags. It was creepy, an eerie kind of carnival. And they sat in the audience in Westerbork, in that theater the Commandant had built, and we were the performers. I went out there on that stage. We'd all been given clothes, proper costumes. There was a fully equipped costume department. The Commandant had thought of everything. All the work was done by Jews, of course. And I did my act, a full orchestra in the pit, playing Das Weiße Rösel. And I went out there and sang Im Weißen Rösel am Wolfgangsee.
In dem Moment, wo wir...
When you can work, when they let you do what you're trained to do. It was the same for us all. The seamstresses making the costumes, the carpenters building the sets. As soon as they had work to do, they were in their element. And that made everything else easier to take. None of us ever thought that we might be the next for the gas chambers. Nobody in the camp believed that, but that's how it was. Next day they were taken out to the trains and transported to Auschwitz or Theresienstadt, all killed, all dead, every single one.
Auschwitz oder nach Theresienstadt. Alles umgebracht, alles tot, alles.
Ich habe da schrecklich viel gemacht. So viel. Schauspielerin war ich, Kabarettiere war ich, Geigerin war ich. Da war mal das große Orchester.
I did all kinds of things. I acted, I did cabaret, played the violin. The world-famous Concertgebouw Orchestra gave a concert, and I was one of the violins. I even did some conducting. We all had some experience in those things, and I can say the quality of the programs in the camp was fantastic. Once, I remember, we had an opening night, and it was so marvelous I completely forgot I was in Westerbork. And it was the same with the other artists. Max Ehrlich said to me once, it was so funny, in my routine I had to wear a little white apron and it was a bit crumpled. And Max said, "You can't go on looking like that." And I said, "Max, where am I supposed to get an iron from in this place?" They all forgot they were in a camp. And when you come out after the performance, after a first night, you expect everything to be wonderful. And then you come out, and it's all dark. No streets, no lights. And you go back to your hut and you climb into your bunk, third one from the bottom. It's such a letdown. That was terrible. The train came twice a week, every week. And we always hoped that this time it wouldn't come. But it came all right. It was terrible. The people were taken out of the place where we were performing and straight out to the trains. And that was where they came to get me too. It was terrible. But what are you supposed to do?
Schrecklich. Aber was soll man machen? Was muss man machen? Und einmal hat Max Ehrlich.
Once, Max Ehrlich did a turn as a coachman, the coach and horses, and he sat there singing a song with the lyrics, "Take it easy, take it slow, no sense in hurrying, there's plenty of time yet."
Lange Zeit.
Wenn man kein Glück hat, dann hat das Leben keinen Sinn. Wenn man kein Glück hat, dann rutscht man aus und fällt man hin. Darum bitte ich in jedem Augenblick ein kleines, kleines, kleines bisschen Glück. Wenn man kein Glück hat, dann hat das Leben keinen Sinn. Wenn man kein Glück hat, dann rutscht man aus und fällt man hin. Darum bitte ich stets, Fortuna bleib mir treu. Unberufen, unberufen, toi, toi, toi.
But their luck ran out. In early August 1944, the camp was disbanded. Now it was the review stars' turn to board the cattle trucks heading for Theresienstadt. Billy Rosen wrote, "Dear Westerbork, the time has come to leave you. Try as I may, I can't help shedding a tear. So many trains I've seen departing from here, and now they're tossing me on the scrap heap too. And now I know I'm going through hell. Adieu, Westerbork. Adieu."
Theresienstadt war ein Ghetto, völlig isoliert und hereingepfercht wurden 60 bis...
Theresienstadt was a ghetto, completely cut off, and 60 to 65,000 Jews crammed into it. It was heavy labor there, I can tell you, and hardly anything to eat. Terrible, gnawing hunger. The artists there all had to work 8 hours, and after work there was this awful vacuum, a terrible feeling of futility. So the artists, the philosophers, the cultural elite that was there started exercising their minds. And how did they do it? They sang, they gave lectures, they painted, and it helped. When you sing, you forget you're hungry. When you do a cabaret routine, you forget you're hungry. And that was how it all started. With diabolical cunning, the SS began to exploit this state of affairs. They saw all this cultural activity, and soon they made the so-called leisure time obligatory. They called it organized leisure. The people there worked an 8-hour day, and in their leisure time, they were creative.
gekommen und haben angefangen, diese Freizeit zu erzwingen. Man nannte es Freizeitgestaltung. Die Leute haben 8 Stunden gearbeitet und in der Freizeit haben sie eben geschaffen.
Organized leisure. The phrase stood for an unbelievable array of cultural events. Symphony concerts, operas, operettas, dance bands and cabaret. The SS turned the cultural activities of the ghetto inhabitants to their own advantage. Theresienstadt was elevated to the rank of a model camp, a gigantic sham to distract attention from the mass murderer's real intentions.
Die Idee der ganzen Freizeitgestaltung in Theresienstadt war,
the idea behind organized leisure at Theresienstadt was to keep the inmates cheerful and give them some entertainment. And they really enjoyed the cabaret. We also did operetta and plays, Fledermaus, for example. We did a complete performance of Fledermaus from the piano score. My husband and I knew the whole thing by heart because we'd done it so often. It was like a reconstruction of the original.
Weil wir das schon so oft gespielt hatten. Wir haben das rekonstruiert. Und wir hatten einen wunderbaren Pianisten, einen gewissen Lederer.
We had a marvelous pianist, Lederer, his name was. There were some excellent performers in Theresienstadt from all over Europe, Vienna, Prague, Berlin. Top-flight artists, conductors, jazzmen, everything. We also had a band. We even did opera. Carmen, for example, in a concert version, with chorus and everything up on the stage. I volunteered to sing along in the chorus, but most of the time I did cabaret with my husband. The stage was usually up in the attic, but there was a real classy stage for special occasions in the Magdeburg barracks.
Auch mitgewirkt dabei. Aber hauptsächlich habe ich eben mit meinem Mann das Kabarett gemacht. Und wir haben auf Dachböden unsere...
In the end, it was equipped like a professional theater, with stage lighting and everything. And that was how we eked out our lives, until the time came when they put us on the trains and shipped us off to Auschwitz.
Beleuchtet mit allem. Und so haben wir unser Leben gefristet, bis es dann aus war, bis wir dann in Transport gekommen sind.
Ich musste mal heimkommen. Gottes Willen, jetzt muss ich zum Kommandant. Ich wusste, wer Heim war.
Ram sent for me. Oh my God, the commandant wants to see me. I knew who Ram was. I went into his office, Herr Obersturmführer, Herr Kommandant, Herr Oberkommandant. And he says, they say you play the piano. I haven't heard you, but I know you're a first-class pianist. I want you to orchestrate the music and conduct the whole show. Kurt Geron is doing a cabaret for me, and he's putting on a review. And we sat there talking it over. And then he said, what shall we call the review? And Kurt said, Carousel. Carousel. That was cabaret. And Kurt wrote the famous Carousel song. We are riding on wooden horses. Nobody else could sing it like he did. We're riding on wooden horses. And I set it in march rhythm.
Wie ein Marsch.
People still have ambitions even if they're living in misery was one of the verses in the theme song of Carousel. Review director Kurt Geron sang it himself. We're riding on wooden horses and going round and round and round. It's a strange journey we've set out on, a journey with nowhere to go.
War ein wunderbarer Regisseur. Wenn du auftrittst, musst du das so machen. Und ich kann mich erinnern, ich habe ein Auftrittslied gehabt.
He was a wonderful director. When you get out there, do it like this. I remember it well. My first number was, Maria Theresa the Empress wanted to build a fortress. That was the first line. He was so marvelous. He didn't even let me try. He jumped up on the stage and showed me exactly how to do it. Maria Theresa the Empress. He was a wonderful director. He managed to get really lovely costumes for us, as far as that was possible. I couldn't believe my eyes. I'd never thought it possible, not in Theresienstadt. We were all hoping that it might be in our favor if we did those performances, and it was. We thought it might help, and it did. You see, they were all for the idea so that when commissions came to inspect the camp, and inspections were very frequent, they could see how well cared for the Jews were. Look, they've got a cabaret, they've got a theater, everything they want.
Damit sie sehen, wie gut es den Juden geht. Sie haben ein Kabarett, sie haben Theater, alles.
In reality, things were very different. Hunger, disease, and death reigned in the ghetto. Over 30,000 Jews died here. Theresienstadt, death's waiting room, was the last leg of the journey to the gas chambers in the extermination camps.
An die Stadtverschönerung erinnere ich mich sehr gut. Ich habe in einem Haus gewohnt. Man hat aus den Zimmern diese...
I remember the urban improvement campaign very well. The rooms in the house I lived in were converted into dormitories with 3 bunks to a bed, one on top of the other. And down on the ground floor was a shop, and there were people living in it, sleeping in the shop window. That was as much Lebensraum as they got. Then they got this idea of urban improvement. And the first thing they did was to take those people living in the shop window. And they took them away and killed them or deported them, I don't know. And instead they decorated the windows and made a real shop window display, clothes and shoes and jewelry, everything. It was very nicely done.
Also jetzt waren dort Kleider und Schmuck und alles war dort. Es war sehr schön gemacht. Ich frage mich, alle diese Jahre, diese 40 Jahre, warum wir überhaupt das Theater gemacht haben. Ob es darum war, weil die Leute haben Bedürfnis.
All the time since then, these last 40 years, I've been asking myself, what made us do those performances? Was it because there was a need? Because people were hungry for culture? Because they missed it and didn't just want to be vegetating? You can go without food and still have a great big world inside you. Or was it because so many of us were professional stage people who wanted to perform? I wanted to perform, I know that. Anyway, we were preparing a routine. We rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed, and finally we were ready. And we were told the performance would take place on a certain day. We rehearsed in the attic of a building where blind people lived. Not a home for the blind, just a building where they'd all been put. They got their meals there and lived there together. In the attic was our rehearsal room.
Also, es war nicht ein Heim, sondern man hatte die Blinden konzentriert in ein Haus, ja, und dort hat man ihnen also Essen gebracht und die haben dort gewohnt. Und auf dem Dachboden haben wir die Proben gemacht. Und an dem Tag, als die Premiere stattfinden sollte, sind wir früher gekommen schon, um dort alles arrangieren. Und wir kommen dort und dort ist so ein Haufen.
On the day we were supposed to open, we got there earlier to arrange everything. And when we arrived, we found a pile of dead bodies in there. Corpses, from the floor to the ceiling. Of course, it was a terrible shock. I don't know how many there were, 40, 50, 100, I just don't know. So I went back down and asked what happened. It turned out that a trainload of deportees had arrived and the corpses were off that train. And they were looking for somewhere to put them, and the attic was empty, so they just dumped all those dead bodies in there. But we were determined to go on with the show. It was vital for us to do that performance. And anyway, so many people had been invited. Then one of the actors hit on an idea. We got all the blind people out of their rooms and stationed them on the stairs like a guard of honor, hands outstretched. And when all the dead bodies were passed down from one blind person to the next, and when they were all at the bottom of the stairs, they were taken somewhere else. And we opened on time.
So mit den Händen. Und wir haben die Leichen so an den Händen der Blinden bis zu unten geschickt, geschoben und die Leichen in einen anderen Platz gebracht und die Premiere hat stattgefunden.
Theresienstadt ist das modernste Ghetto, das die Welt heute hat.
Theresienstadt ist die schönste Stadt der Welt. Und man gibt noch einen Namen. Und die Musik spielt dazu.
Ich weiß, dass Karel Schwenk, ein Kabarett geschrieben hat, das geheißen
I know that Karel Schwenk wrote a cabaret with a title you could translate as Here's to Life, or perhaps Long Live Life. And at the end of one of the scenes in the show, I remember it like it was yesterday. All the actors joined hands, advanced to the edge of the stage, and sang a song. Just a simple refrain. And that refrain became the so-called Theresienstadt anthem. Everyone in the camp sang it, just a few lines, but it expressed so much optimism.
Einfaches Liedchen. Und das wurde, der Refrain, der wurde unsere sogenannte Hymne. Ja, das hat das ganze Lager Theresienstadt, hat das gesungen, paar Wörtchen, die zu Schluss sehr viel Optimismus ausdrücken. Všechno jde, když se chce, za ruce se vezmeme a na troskách geta budeme se smát.
Seine Stärke war, er hat selber die Texte gemacht, er hat auf Gitarre gespielt und er hat eigentlich...
He was good, all right. He wrote the lyrics himself, played the guitar, and wrote very critical texts, sometimes attacking the regime. The performances were in Czech, so it wasn't too much of a risk because there were hardly any informers. And that was how he managed to stage political cabaret in Theresienstadt for the people in the ghetto. It helped us. And Karel Svenk was also a brilliant actor, a comedian, a clown. Physically, he was small and frail. I remember once in Buchenwald how he fooled the SS into thinking he was working. The work was too much for him, but there he was, shamming away, just like Charlie Chaplin, pretending to carry wood. We had to be careful not to laugh, because that would have been the end of him. Right to the very end, he was just one big cabaret act. Once we were en route for Mauthausen, and American fighters strafed us with gunfire, wrecking the carriages, so we had to go on foot. It was a mental thing with Karel Svenk. First his spirit broke, that took the stuffing out of him. And then his body gave up on him, and he died more or less in my arms, in that cattle truck. And somewhere out there they buried him.
In erster Linie geistig nicht ausgehalten, sein Geist hat ihn verlassen. Dann wurde er schwach und dann hat ihn sein Körper verlassen und er starb praktisch in meinen Armen dort in dem Waggon und dort ist er irgendwo begraben.
Wenn man will, dann gelingt's. Hand in Hand und fest vereint, trotz der schweren Zeit. Humor ist doch im Herzen. Jeden Tag ziehen wir um, Platz für neue wird geschafft. 30 Worte nur zu schreiben sind erlaubt. Ja, doch morgen fängt das Leben an. Der Tag schon näher rückt, packen wir das kleine Bündel dann. Nach Haus wir kehren zurück. Wenn man will, dann gelingt's, Hand in Hand und fest vereint. Auf den Ghetto-Trümmern lachen werden wir.
Die SS, die wollte ja, dass dort Aktivitäten musikalische sind, es als Vorzeige.
The SS supported musical activities. They wanted it to be a model concentration camp they could show the Red Cross people. And that was when Erich Vogel formed the first ghetto swingers. And whenever some of them were deported to Auschwitz, they were replaced by others. And that was how I got to be their drummer, because the drummer before me got sent to Auschwitz. So they were looking for a drummer. They knew I played the guitar and also played the drums. I was the only swing drummer in Theresienstadt. And so I joined the ghetto swingers, and we played American swing.
Und ich war der einzige Schlagzeuger, swingende Schlagzeuger dort in Theresienstadt. Und so wurde ich der Drummer dort der Ghetto Swingers. Und wir spielten amerikanische Swingmusik.
Officially, hot jazz and swing had been banned by the Nazis throughout the Reich. Here, things were different.
Der Kommandant Rahm hat zu mir gesagt, Sie, wenn das Orchester...
Commandant Rahm said to me, I want you to conduct the band. And I want it as jazzy as possible, American arrangements. I said, what? He said, I want it to sound like an American band. And that's how it sounded. We played all kinds of things, the St. Louis Blues, the Tiger Rag in good arrangements, American through and through. It was so good, even the ambassadors applauded.
Und es war so gut, dass sogar die Botschafter applaudiert haben.
Images of a consummately crafted propaganda campaign. Jews having a good time out in the open to the strains of a jazz band, while Europe was being razed to the ground. Himmler commissioned a film called The Führer Gives the Jews a Town. Kurt Geron was to direct it. Theresienstadt was transformed into a movie set. Filming started on the 16th of August 1944. Every single shot was faked.
Dort habe ich den Kurt Geron gesehen. Ist gelaufen.
That was when I saw Kurt Geron rushing around and shouting like a big film director. I was 20 at the time, and I remember thinking, my God, doesn't he realize what he's doing? Does he really have no awareness at all? It's like in Klaus Mann's novel Mephisto. He was so happy he was directing a film, he simply forgot everything else. It wasn't Theresienstadt anymore, and he was the big film director.
War der große Uferregisseur.
Da wurden die Häuser frisch getüncht und da ist ein Karussell aufgebaut.
The houses were freshly whitewashed and a carousel was put up for the children. And the children were forced to ride round and round on it until they could hardly stand up. And they told them, when Rahm comes around with the delegation, the Swiss delegation, go up to them and say, "No more chocolate, please, Uncle Rahm," and lots of other things like that. Another thing I witnessed was how a whole trainload of children arrived, complete with doctors and medical personnel. And a week later, they put all the children on another train, together with the nurses and doctors, and shipped them off somewhere to the gas chambers.
Schwestern und Ärztepersonal und alles dazu gegeben. Und eine Woche später haben sie die ganzen Kinder mitsamt dem Pflegepersonal und allen irgendwohin ins Gas geschickt.
Meine Damen und Herren, bekommen Sie keinen Schreck. Wenn Sie diesen Revolver...
Kurt Geron in his famous part as the cabaret director in Blue Angel. In his ghetto film, the SS wanted him to appear in person.
Mein August kein Vogel mehr.
Geron staged an open-air cabaret performance outside the gates of the town. He himself sang Mac the Knife.
Und die trägt er im Gesicht. Und Mackies, der hat ein Messer, doch das Messer sieht man nicht. An einem schönen blauen Sonntag liegt ein toter Mann am Strand und ein Mensch geht um die Ecke, den man Mackie Messer nennt.
Behind the camera were SS men, pistols at the ready. The captive audience remained stubbornly mute. Even when the Hofer Cabaret came on, there was little response.
Once that film was in the can, they started the really big deportations to Auschwitz. The ghetto swingers got sent to Auschwitz too. Kurt Geron was already there. He was one of the first to go.
Auch die Ghetto-Swinger gingen nach Auschwitz. Und Kurt Geron schon vorher, der ging wohl als einer der ersten.
Ich habe ihn zum letzten Mal gesehen in dem Transport.
The last time I saw him was on the platform next to the train that was to take him away. He fell on his knees in front of the SS and said, "But I did that film for you." But all they did was kick him and hurl him onto the train. That was the last I saw of him.
Weggeworfen in den Zug. So habe ich den Kurt Geron zum letzten Mal gesehen.
Dann mussten wir durch dieses Lagertor und im Lauf.
And they herded us through that gate with the inscription, "At the double, quick march." the SS men with German shepherd dogs. And one of them said, "Just so you know where you are, you're in the Auschwitz extermination camp. This is the entrance through that gate, and that's the exit through that chimney stack. Just so you know where you are." We were the camp band, all dressed the same, and they made us play. They made us play when the others were on their way to the gas chambers. We had to stand there and play La Paloma, that's one of the pieces I remember. Or when the labor force went marching out in the mornings. Then we played at the gate. But sometimes they made us play for the people going to the gas chambers.
Musik antreten und dann spielten wir am Lagertor, aber auch manchmal während die in der Gaskammer fuhren, spielten wir dann.
In Auschwitz, da war mein Haar schon weg, ganz glatt. Hatte ich eine Glatze.
It was in Auschwitz. My hair was all gone. Then someone came and said, "We're going to the rehearsal." I said, "Rehearsal? In Auschwitz?" "Yes," she said, "it's a matter of life and death." I said, "What do I have to do?" She said, "Perform outside the gas chambers." I couldn't do it. I thought, let them kill me if they want to, but I can't do it. Just imagine. What if I see my family, people I know, and I'm out there doing my routine? I just couldn't. So I refused to take part. And then someone said, "Where do you think you're going?" I said, "I can't go on." They said, "You can't go on? Lost your voice, have you?" And I said, "Yes." And then they put me in the hut with all the people who had been sentenced to death. I swear I'll never know how I got out of there.
Ich weiß bei Gott nicht, wie ich da rausgekommen bin.
In Monowitz das war ein Arbeitslager, da wo wir arbeiten da bei IG Farben Auschwitz.
Monowitz was a labor camp. We were working for IG Farben Auschwitz, the Buna works. Every morning at 4 or 5 the band played, then 3/4 of an hour on foot to the factory and back in the evening. Once a month they came over from Birkenau to see if we still had any flesh on our bones. And if you didn't, you went straight to the ovens.
Noch was Fleisch drauf war. Und und dann gingen die direkt in den Ofen.
In Monowitz, a friend of mine from Brussels did a Charlie Chaplin act. He had his walk off to a T. We laughed ourselves sick. The next day they executed him.
Und am nächsten Tag haben sie Leute verhängt. Ich kann mich erinnern, dass ich sogar, wo wir also wirklich alle verzweifelt waren.
I can remember even when things got really desperate, we would stand in a corner and tell jokes. There we were in the corner, laughing our heads off, in that terrible, fatal situation. Just standing there and laughing was much better than letting yourself go and lapsing into despair.
Das ist viel wichtiger, als sich fallen zu lassen und zu verzweifeln.
Ohne Humor ging es nicht, ohne Humor.
Without humor, we'd never have survived. Humor made us strong.
Humor hat uns stark gemacht.
It was a blessing for the people there, and for us too. It saved my life. Otherwise, I'd have gone to the gas chambers myself.
Es ist ein Nonsens, es ist eine Groteske, es ist eine Absurdität, nicht wahr?
It's nonsensical, grotesque, absurd. Absurdist literature, Beckett, that was something I understood right away. Ionesco and all the rest of them, Arabal. The more meshuggah, the better, to put it the Jewish way. Sheer insanity. As long as people are sure they can kill without being called to account, there'll always be some who are only too glad to do it, if need be with music and cabaret.
Sogar mit Musik und Kabarett dabei.
Eines Tages kommt jemand und sagt, also hör mal, du musst heute Abend spielen.
One day someone came and said, "Coco, you have to play tonight. In block such and such, an SS man has arranged it, he wants some music." So when I came with my guitar, there were 2 Dutchmen there, Johnny and Jones. And we did our stint, and one of the things Johnny and Jones played was the Flatfoot Floozy and the Floy Floy.
Wir spielten da und Johnny und Jones spielten unter anderem The Flatfoot Floozy with the Floy Floy.
We're gonna sing about the floozy and the Floy Floy. Let's sing about the floozy and the Floy Floy. We're gonna sing about the floozy and the Floy Floy. Fly die, fly die, fly die, fly die. Johnny and Jones are singing a crazy song for you. If you think there is something wrong, swinging the way we do.
And afterwards, there was that macabre business when that orderly said, "Right, you all come with me. This is where you get your reward." And he unlocked the shed, and it was full of clothes, shoes, and human hair. Stacks of it, all over the place. And he switched on a dim light bulb and he said, "Okay, you can choose one pair of shoes each."
Und sagt, sucht euch jeder ein paar Schuhe aus.
Flatfoot Floozy and the Fly Fly. The Flatfoot Floozy and the Fly Fly. The Flatfoot Floozy and the Fly Fly. Fly die, fly die, fly die, fly die. Ah da 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 da. Ah da 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 da. Ah da 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 da. Read it, read it, read it, read it. Ah da 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 da. Ah da 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 da. Ah da 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 da. Read it, read it, read it, read it. Da bab boo bab the battle bay, ba da bab the beat do day, ba da da dee do bab the battle do day, hop the did biddy do. Ah da 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 da, ah da 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 da, ah da 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 da. Read it, read it, read it, the Flatfoot Floozy and the Fly Fly, the Flatfoot Floozy and the Fly Fly, the Flatfoot Floozy and the Fly Fly, flat out, flat out, flat out, flat out, the Flatfoot Floozy and the Fly Fly. The Flatfoot Floozy and the Fly Fly. The Flatfoot Floozy and the Fly Fly. Flat off, flat off, flat off, flat off. If you feel low down and you don't know what to do, and you want to show down, it's the only dance for you. The Flatfoot Floozy and the Fly Flew. The Flatfoot Floozy and the Flew Flew. The Flatfoot Floozy and the Flew Flew. Fly die, fly die, fly die, fly die. It's the Flatfoot Floozy and the Fly Fly. Fly die, fly die, fly die, fly.